Good evening, Zimbabwe. You are listening to Studio 7 from the Voice of America on Wednesday, October 29th, 2014. And this is Live Talk. I'm Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kip Stube.
Tonight on Live Talk, we are going to talk about the death of Zambian President Michael Sata.
To join the discussion, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back.
Live Talk, as usual, goes out to Zimbabwe on our 909 medium wave frequency and on the 4930, 5940 and 15455 kilohertz shortwave, Monday through Friday at 8:30 p.m.
And on the internet, you can find us at www.voazimbabwe.com, www.voashona.com, and www.voindebele.com.
It's fake news to the Zambian people because this is now the second time when a sitting president dying in office. The Zambian people were also celebrating the last 50 years of independence on the 24th of October. So and now the happiness that was there is also being affected.
Okakhathesi abantu bakhanya basahlulukelwe sibili bonke abantu lanxa nje ubesele isikhathi egulu umongameli kodwa ukufa kwakhe I think kwethuse abanengi.
Nona kuti muZambia muna kuitwa mirishonga yakanyanya dzakafanana nedzaita kunyika dzinona dzakafanana nedzaZimbabwe nedzimwe nyika dziri muAfrica. Kubva Zambia yawana kutonga kuzere muna 1954. Hatina kunyanyoona matambudziko emhirizhonga.
Once again, thanks for joining us. You are listening to Studio 7 Live Talk. And tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about the passing on of Zambian President Michael Sata.
Mr. Sata was elected president in 2011. He died after a long illness. And the Zambian government announced yesterday that Vice President Guy Scott, a white Zambian of Scottish descent, has been appointed acting president until elections are held within next 90 days.
Sata becomes the second Zambian leader to die in office after the death in 2008 of Levi Mwanawasa.
What do you think about this issue? If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back. That number again 001-202-619-2077. You can also send us a message on WhatsApp and the number is 1-202-465-0318. Ye kungakunjalo ke phone.
Onguka Gibbs nasi toda kuti tinge tichitarisa nezverufu rwava Michael Sata vakashaya nezuro kuchipatara chekuLondon mushure mekunge vaendeswa ikoko mwedzi unoyu vachirwara. Hapana anoziva kuti vanga vachirwara nei, asi nhasi hurumende yeZambia yabva yazivisa kuti muteedzeri wavo vaGuy Scott ndo vachambofanobata matomu kwemwedzi mitatu kusvika paitwa sarudzo. Asi bumbiro remutemo reZambia haritenderi vaScott kuti vange vachikwikwidza musarudzo idzodzi nekuti rinotiro kana vabereki vako vasina kuberekerwa muZambia haukwanise kuita mutungamiri wenyika. Izvi zvakauya mushure mekunetsana panyaya yavaChiluba nekuti vamwe vaiti vabereki vavaChiluba avo vakashayawo vaFrederick Chiluba vainge vari vekuMalawi, zvakapa kuti pazochinjwe bumbiro remutemo remuZambia. Gibbs.
Yebo kambe Zulu ndaba siyahlangana ke ngodaba oludanisayo kakhulu ke Blessing ukuthi ke umnumzana uMichael Sata enokade umongameli weZambia kasekho. Sizwile ke ukuthi ubhubhe izolo kwele London lapha kade ngeniswe khona egula sibilo kwamagama. Sizwile ke namhlanje uhulumende weZambia sithi sebekudingeke uvice president ukuthi abe nguye ozabe zibamba isikhundla kuze kwenziwe ukhetho. Ukhetho lolu luyayenziwa nxa kungakwana 90 days within khona phana 90 days yankhona. So ke kodwa sikubona ukuthi umnumzana ke uGuy Scott yena obamba isikhundla lesi kasoze yenelise ukuthi angene kukhetho lolu ngoba abazali bakhe bazalelwe eScotland. So yena ngokwakhe kukhanya ngazani iconstitution kumbe ngithi isekelo sombuso welizwe asivumi. So vele kwakukhiwa ngesikhathi sikaFrederick Chiluba owaye ngumongameli. Kwangani uyahluphana ke lo mnumzana ke uKenneth Kaunda ngesikhundla sokuthi wazalelwe eMalawi, wazalelwe eZambia kumbe ngaphi ngaphi. Kodwa siyakhumbula ukuthi umnumzana ke uKenneth Kaunda nguye wabumba uhulumende weZambia. And wayejela ukukhuluma laphana uyakhumbula kudala one Zambia
One Nation.
One Nation. Kwakuvele kuyislogan yakhona.
And Gibbs, I think we have our first guest, that is Professor Shadreck Guto in South Africa. Professor Guto, good evening.
Good evening to you and good evening to your listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, it's such a short notice. Gibbs, you can start the ball rolling.
Yeah, Professor Guto, can you actually give us your take on the death of Mr. Michael Sata in Zambia?
Well, any death is a sad death. And if we start from that point of view, we would say, let's send the condolences to the family, but also to the people of Zambia, a great nation, but they have lost a leader now. And one would say that, okay, what?
Professor Guto? Professor Guto, we are losing you. If you are using the speakerphone, it might not work for us.
Okay, so I will put the speaker down so we can just continue then.
Okay.
Yes. Is it better now?
It is better, yes.
Yes, so what I was saying is that we are dealing here with a situation where the nation has lost a leader, but the family has also lost a family member and an elder in the family. So we send condolences to both the family, but also to Zambia. And I think that it becomes important to underline first. Secondly, it is really to say that we are dealing here with a nation that went through a period of one-party state to a multi-party state, and in the process, we have seen where the country has now been ruled by almost three political parties that really through the ballot box, not through the barrel of a gun. And from that point of view, I think we have to also note that and say the Zambians have demonstrated good transitions from one-party state to a multi-party state, but also significantly where different political parties, the ruling ones, have been defeated, and they bow out to those who have defeated them from the opposition without resistance. And I think that is healthy to be able to say that multi-party democracy is now becoming entrenched in Zambia as a value system, as the expectation, not just because it is written into the constitution. So I think those are really milestones. But of course now it's a question of succession. Mind you, because he has died before his term ends, it means therefore that there will be acting president for 90 days only, 3 months, which means that Zambia will be mourning, burying the leader, but at the same time, already I'm sure that the politicians, they are already started strategies of campaigning and so on, and they will use this as a process of sending laying the president to rest, the late president, now Michael Sata, but at the same time, their mind is more focused on campaigning. So some will even use the funeral and as a campaign forum and so on. So this is where we are at the moment in Zambia.
Thank you so much, Professor Guto, and we are being joined by two more guests, and that is we have Mr. Shakespeare Hamauswa at Mulungushi University in Zambia. Mr. Hamauswa, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
We are doing great, and thanks for joining us. And we also have Vusumuzi Sifile Sibanda, who is also based in Zambia. Mr. Sibanda, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
We are doing great. Thanks for joining us. Rega nditange nekwamuri vaHamauswa. Mungatudza kuti zvinhu zvakamira sei, zviri kutambirwa sei zverufu rwavasata pari zvino?
Rufu rwavasata ndingati muchidimbu rwauya panguva vana veZambia vanga vachipemberera kuwana kuchitonga kuzere vasvitsa makore 50. Saka zvinova zvinhu zvashungurudza vana vanhu ruzhinji rwemuZambia. Zvakadaro tiri kuona vanhu vazhinji vari kuratidzawo kushushikana zvikuru. Vamwe vari kuzvitambira kuri kuitwa ndekuti mutungamiri wenyika anga achirwara zvanga zvaakuzikanwa nevanhu, kunyange hurumende yanga isina kuzviburitsa pachena. Asi zvinhu zvazenge pakupedzisira munhu wose akuziva kuti mutungamiri wenyika haasi kunzwa zvakanaka, kunyanya-nyanya zvichiratidza nekushayikwa kwaakaitwa pakupemberera kwekuwana kuchitonga kuzere kwemakore 50. Saka ndo zvinhu zviri apo, asi inyaya huru iri kutaurika pari zvino inyaya yekuti ndiani uchatora chinzvimbo chasiyiwa nemushakabvu vasata. Iyoyo ndo nyaya yatinetsei, asi sezvabuda mumapepanhau nezvabuda munhau dzemuZambia zviri kuratidza kuti vaMichael Sata vasanosiyiwa chinzvimbo chavo navaGuy Scott vanga vari vice president, ndo vakusanomirira vakamira sapresident wenyika kwemazuva anokwana kuita iwo mwedzi 3 kana kuti mazuva 90 days achizoitwa maelections.
Tinotenda vaHamauswa. Of course, Mr. Hamauswa is saying that indeed the death came as a shock, but some people knew for quite some time now that the president was not well, and of course he's also talking about the issue of succession, saying that Mr. Guy Scott, who is the acting president, will be acting on an interim basis for the next 90 days. And he's saying, of course, like he's agreeing with Professor Guto, that might be a bit problematic there as people jostle for the presidential seat.
Yes, kweke mnumzana Sifile Sibanda ubona ngazani kathesi kwenzakalani, sizwile ke ukuthi umnumzana uGuy Scott ngiyona sezibambile khola ngapho, kodwa kuxokozela kanganani kubandla leli nxa usukhangele abafuna ukuthi bangene kukhetho oluyalandela?
Ya kathesi kusasenzima ukuthi sitsho ukuthi isimo singahamba njani, kodwa ke ngathi amaviki amalutshwana asanda kwedlula umnumzana uSathe engakasithiyi bekuvele sokuqalile nje ukuxokozela ebandleni elibusayo le-Patriotic Front. Like sike sabona nje owayengunobhala jikelele walelo bandla umnumzana weNtakabimba wasuswa esikhundleni kokunye wakubonakala ungani yikulwisana kube kuvele sokukhona abantu sebebona ukuthi umongameli ubengaphilanga, ubekhanya ukuthi impilo yakhe bekunganaba akusamanga kuhle, so vele sebeqalisa ukulwisana. Abanye laba omunye lomunye sebezama ukuthi babone ukuthi bona bangazifikela njani ehwahweni.
Kodwa kusezokuqhubeka
kathesi ke sokuzahlupha manje ukuthi uGuy Scott nguye osebambile isikhundla sokuba ngumongameli, kodwa ke nxa ukhangela isisekelo sombuso salapha kasimvumeli ukuthi abe ngumongameli ngoba yena abazali bakhe bobabili kabazalelwa ngeZambia.
Yes, siyakuzwa kakhulu ke Sifile khona ngapho ungayikatshana ubambe. What you were saying is that already in the Patriotic Front, there are some people who have been showing some signs that they want to occupy the topmost position in that party. And one of them is Mr. Kabimba, who is the SG of that party, the Secretary General. So he may be positioning himself for the big kill, because this is the man who was the right-hand man of Mr. Sata. So at the end of the day, he says, since Mr. Guy Scott is having that problem that he cannot contest at the elections, this may actually bring into play a lot of hands in that party.
Of course, for those of you who are just joining us tonight on Live Talk, we are talking about the death of Zambian President Michael Sata, who was first elected as the Zambian leader in 2011. He died yesterday in London, that is around 11 p.m., according to a statement from the Zambian government. Professor Guto, before we take our caller here, talking about succession, what can Zimbabwe learn from what is happening in Zambia?
Well, I think there are so many lessons that can be learned. First, I already mentioned that Zambia has entrenched multi-party electoral system where people decide peacefully in free and fair elections on which party and which people they choose to lead them. And they have alternated in Zambia when in Zimbabwe there has been no change since 1980. And the ruling party is still clinging to power, and you can see how the wife of the president is trying to position herself and fighting even people who are in the liberation movement when she was a baby and did not even know what was going on. And therefore, I think Zimbabweans have a lot to learn from Zambia. Peaceful change of government. There's nothing wrong with regime change as long as it is peaceful and it is expressed through elections. Secondly, I think that it brings a dimension because ZANU-PF, particularly under Robert Mugabe, has promoted a lot of, if you like, hatred of white people. And I think that, but it is a strategy, it is a political strategy to grab wealth and so on, and to blame, whites for the misery and lack of leadership that is there in ZANU-PF. In Zambia, the vice president is a white immigrant who has been naturalized, of course, so he's Zambian, but he's Zambian not even by birth or having lived there for generations. And I think that the fact that he's going to be president for at least 3 months, that is 90 days, is also a lesson that people have to understand that all citizens are equal and they are equal to lead the country provided the people choose them or put them in positions where they can succeed, as has happened in this case. Mr. Scott did not campaign as the president, but he was the one who was the standing mate of the late now president, former president Shatter. So I think that is a second lesson, which is important not just to Zimbabwe, but to many countries in Africa where people who are indigenous, black, use narrow nationalism, racialize politics, and so that they can remain in power, knowing that the majority of the voters, of course, are Africans and so on. So I think that is a second lesson. The third one, which is a sad one, and not just lessons for Zimbabwe and the rest of Africa. This one is really one, is to be able to see here that we are dealing with the question of constitutionalism, where the succession is not being contested, even though my co-panelists have indicated that the Secretary General of the party, the Patriotic Front, is already fronting himself. But the Secretary General of a political party is usually a second most powerful person within a party. And I think because of that, there's really nothing wrong about it, even though Mr. Scott, the acting president, now may wish to go for elections, but I believe that the Secretary General has more credibility in the party to be able to be seen to be the one who may be put forward as the candidate for the party. But in politics, you never know; things may change. But there's nothing wrong with that. I already indicated that already. The whole question of succession, but also the whole question of elections are now on the cards.
Thank you so much, Professor Guto. For those of you who are just joining us tonight on Studio 7 Live Talk, we are talking about the death of Zambian President Michael Sata. Of course, Sata was popularly known as King Cobra because of his sharp tongue. He did not back away from criticizing people that he did not agree with. That's why they nicknamed him King Cobra. Tine mterere kutanga mkoma Donald Mamboma. Makadi mkoma Donald.
Ndipo mkoma blessing makasi mere.
Tiripo zorai volume radio yenyu mkoma Donald atizonzwa nani?
Alright, thanks. Yeah, parufugwa wasata growth gwadza mkoma blessing.
Radio yenyu ichiri kunzwika mkoma Donald.
Alright.
Inoita maungira atizozombokunzwei.
Alright. Gunoti gwadza rufugwa wasata mkoma blessing.
Itodzimai radio yacho mkoma Donald ndokuti tinzwa nani?
Hello, yeah, makuninga.
Oh, taurai tinzwa.
Ndiri kuti asiti manje tinozokombea situation needu yekumushai. Kuti apa ziti tione chinja pane chidhobho tadza kuti ugodadza kukombea one chekwenyu kuti kana pane chidhobho pakati kachakati woti hasi kwedu kungade kwakadai handiti. Saka isitiri kuti dei munyika medu munomu bato redu riri kutonga raikopa kune mamwe mapato. Like iwavo vakagwarawo hondo panguva imwe chete vana Frelimo, vana veZambia ava, vana Tanzania, vana chama chamapinduza. Asi kuti nenyaya yekuti hatigoni kukopa zvakanaka zvefana vamwe. That's why muchiona avachino vavachingani chero vashaikawo toti sorry but kubva kuna vakaunda vachiluva vamwana wasa ava vanga vave vechingani
vechishanu.
Isa hatikwanisi kuzviita izvozvo why? Handimoona pane dambudziko redu ndo pane nyaya yese ipapo kuti hatina kwatinomboinda nokuti iko zvino plus tasaimona kuti politics dzavo dzine gwara 90 days avo vachiekita vari pano chiripetwa maelections dei muri munomu dati tamhirizhonga kana kutoti hameno mukuru wamasoja achiti ndini uyo achiti ndini saka zvinongotiradza ngoti fongwawo dzidzawo savanhu so
aiwa tinotenda zvikuru mukoma Donald.
Atenda.
Of course, Donald is saying Zimbabwe has a lot to learn from Zambia, especially the fact that Zambia has had 5 presidents so far from the time it got independence, from Kaunda, Chiluba, Mwanawasa, Sata, and Banda. You know, he's saying those are the things that we want to see in Zimbabwe, transition of power, which is not violent, and is afraid that in Zimbabwe it might turn violent should anything happen to President Robert Mugabe, because the succession is not clear. He's saying, for example, in Frelimo, it has been smooth. The same in with Chama Pinduzi, it's smooth. The ANC is smooth. But in Zimbabwe, it's chaotic.
Mr. Hamauswa, are you still on the line?
Yes.
Now, hitting on that point of succession in Zambia and Zimbabwe, you know, can we draw some parallels, you know, in terms of what is happening in Zambia right now, you know, in Zimbabwe? Can Zimbabwe get to that kind of position?
Yeah, I think, you know, yes, they are all African countries that have gone through maybe similar conditions during the colonial period, but the Zimbabwean situation is unique in the sense that the contentious issues that were surrounding the Zimbabwean crisis were centered on the issue of land. Even if you remember what happened also to President Michael Sata when he came in, there was this factor which was coined the Sata factor, that he promised to chase away the Chinese and so forth. So you see, yes, there are parallel lines, and we say we expect to see political development in the whole of Southern Africa. People would expect to see a smooth transfer of power. That issue, I think, Zambian people have been actually good, especially in changing the government since 1991, when they managed to break from the one-party state that was presided over by Kenneth Kaunda. But then in Zimbabwe now it's problematic. Though even though we say there was the issue of land and other issues that could be peculiar to the Zimbabwean situation, because again in Zimbabwe we find that the whites, they had made a decision to make Zimbabwe their home area. So there wasn't much at stake in countries like Zambia. Yes, copper is there, but in Zimbabwe it was really the home area for the colonial settlers. So this is why Zimbabwe's issue has been on the spotlight. And to the ZANU-PF now, they just felt maybe it was going to be Mugabe alone who could fight the whites, of which that is wrong. We would find that in Zambia, that the transfer of power from one leader to another, you can trace some of the patriotic sentiments that have been expressed by these different leaders from Chiluba, Mwanawasa, Banda, Michael Sata. Now we have an interesting case where we have a white guy now the acting president. It's very interesting. It shows that because of globalization, we are no longer confined to one area, and people can move from one place to another. Like Zimbabweans, they are all over now, the place. So it really it shows that where we are going, it doesn't matter whether one is really black or white, but what is important is that person being selected to be a leader, does that person have the interest of the country at heart? And it is also to do with a democratic system that is well entrenched, that is not centered on an individual. Then there's no worry about who is really in place, because there are systems that will ensure accountability and also ensures that the leader is really following and guarding the values and the principles of the particular country.
Thank you so much. We just want to quickly read what people are writing on WhatsApp. There's Biula who says, ne urombo nekushayikwa kwaita vasata kurasikirwa kukuru. Sifa says, vatungamiri venyika vanoenda kunorapwa kunze vanodii kuvaka zvipatara kana kuti chipatara chavo musadhak zvinokwanisa kuvabatsira pane kuburitsa mari yakawanda. Tinoona vaMugabe vanoenda kunze kunorapwa. Matthew says he will be missed. I am told he tried to turn around Zambia's economy. And of course, Saunyama says, rest in peace, President Sata, gone so early. Of course, Baldwin says the man was a true icon of Zambia. I've seen much of the needed development in that country, and his departure is very disturbing. May he so rest in peace. Professor Guto, Mr. Sibanda, and Mr. Hamauswa, please do stay on the line. We'll be back shortly. And for our radio listeners, we are streaming live. Go to www.voazimbabwe.com and press on LiveTalk. And also, Knox, stay on the line. This is Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kip Stube saying, stay tuned to Zimbabwe.
for those of you who are just joining us, good night. And tonight on Studio 7, we are talking about the death of Zambian leader Levi Mwanawasa. He died in a London hospital yesterday. And of course, Guy Scott, who is the Zambian vice president, has been nominated to lead Zambia for the next 90 days until fresh elections are held. Gibbs.
If you wish to join the show right now, phone us directly at this number 001-202-619-2077 and we'll call you back. You can also send us a message on WhatsApp, and our number is 1-202-465-0318. In our case, Mr. Vusumuzi Sifile Sibanda, who is a Zimbabwean based in Zambia and is working for Panos, but is speaking on his own behalf today. Then we've got Professor Shadreck Guto of the University of South Africa. And then we've got Mr. Shakespeare Hamauswa, who is a political analyst based at Lubumbashi University.
Mulungushi. Yeah, Professor Guto, we know you have a tight schedule, but just one last question, right?
Yes, please.
One of our listeners here asked the question. The question was, he is actually disturbed that African leaders, when they are not feeling well, they tend to go to Europe to seek treatment. Of course, you can talk of the late Zambian president, Levi Mwanawasa. He died in France. There are a number of issues. Some died in Paris. Meles Zenawi, the Ethiopian leader, died in Brussels. So he's saying, why not build hospitals in Africa, or at least have a hospital that all the countries in the SADC region contribute, and have a first-class hospital in Africa rather than going to Europe. You also have in Zimbabwe, President Robert Mugabe, for a simple operation like a cataract operation, he will fly to Singapore.
Well, I think that caller is quite correct in indicating that we have leaders who are really not leaders. And that is what it ends up being, that if you are a leader and you are not focusing on development of your country, and here by development, it is not just saying how much copper is extracted from you, how much diamonds, how much uranium or gold or whatever, but rather on whatever resources that are available, whether they are agricultural, there are minerals, there's oil, there is whatever it is, that you transform this and you use whatever revenue is generated to further build the infrastructure, which later then creates conditions for better economic performance and development. So basically, I think that this is something that we have to talk about as Africans and say, this needs to stop, because the money that they are using to go abroad in hospitals, and so they are just boosting the economies of those countries where they run to, when their own people with the same kind of illnesses and diseases die because they cannot be held. So it is not just a question that they go abroad, but it means that they don't care for their people, they are not patriotic, they do not want to serve the people, they are serving themselves. So I think that this is something that we really need to highlight and to have a campaign, social activism, so that our leaders focus in developing the countries so that when they are sick, they go to the best hospitals in their own countries. And this also applies in the areas of education where they send their children abroad to go to school, because the schools that we have are not good enough. And they are not investing in that, and therefore not investing in producing future knowledge leaders for their own economies and so forth. So I believe that this is something that we have to say, let President former President rest well, but his leadership showed weaknesses at the point when he was ill by him going to die elsewhere, like many other leaders. You know, we have some leaders on this continent, a few, for example, who actually they are not sick, but they spend more time in Europe and they come to visit their countries as if they are tourists. I think Cameroon is one such example. So there are a lot of bad leaders on the continent, and the citizens who vote and the citizens who speak and the citizens who teach and learn ought to know all these facts and try to change them for the better so that Africa can rise again.
Professor Guto, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Of course, Professor Guto is another engagement, but of course, we want to thank him for his valuable contribution. Gibbs.
Yes, buyele ke umnumzana Sifile Sibanda lokhu sekucingwa umnumzana.
Yeah, ngisasekhona.
Yes, siyabona ukuthi ke omongameli abanengi kwele Africa nxa ukuthi begula baye kwamanye amazwe. Njalo abanye umuntu engachanje ngokwesihlabo okuncane uzothola sethetheke indizamtshina sihambe ngaphi ngaphi. Yeah, antu yabona khonokho. So ke kambe ngathini ngakholoko akumelanga ukuthi balungise yini lokho singathi infrastructure yakhona eAfrica. Wenza ukuthi isibhedlela phela abantu bangene njalo lezemfundo uzothola abantwana babo bafunda ngaphi ngaphi. Akungene khona lapho Sifile.
Yeah, into esisubuhlungena leyo bracket ukuthi bethola ukuthi bona abakhokheli bethu yonke into encane njengoba sisho nje ukuthi even umuntu angaphonga uba lokuyisihlabo nje okuncane uzothwase sethethe indizamtshina waye emazweni ukuyadinga ukuthi ayelatshwe. Ukanti ke uZulu abantu ababavotela minyaka yonke bona bahlala khona lapha besiya emaklinika angela mithi ezibhedlela ezingela amanesi labodokotela. So kuyinto ezisubuhlungu kakhulu ukuthi bona ngoba balendlela yokuthi ngase izinto zingasabamelanga kuhle bayakwanisa ukuthi bayedinga usizo kwezinye indawo, kodwa ke abasakhangela ukuthi abantu ke izinkulungwane zabantu ezibavotela izinkulungwane zabantu ezikhangelele kubo ukuthi babe yibo ababancedisayo, ababe yibo abangayenza ukuthi silungisise lezi isimo esikhona.
Yes, I was Sifile. What Mr. Sifile is saying that it's better for African leaders to actually take care of their health infrastructure and all those basic necessities. Instead of if somebody is feeling some kind of flu, flies out of the country and gets some kind of treatment. So he says this is not right at all.
Titore mterero da gara parnare mkoma nox makadi.
Hello, about it, God bless you.
Aiwa tinakukutiza tipewo pfungwa dzenyu.
It's unfortunate, Comrade Guto has just left. I wanted to say first of all, Makabile Henyu.
Oh, sorry about that, unfortunately.
Comrade Guto is the University of Zimbabwe.
Aiwa tichava boresa.
In a nutshell, we summarize as you like about the African dictators. It's unfortunate, and I'm going to say very sorry to my Zambian counterparts, the likes of Hillary, Deepface, the likes of Kakunda. But truly, dictatorship, people in Africa, say for a few, America and South Africa, and things like that. Zvinoita zvekuti Mwari ndo paanopinda nawo. Minamato yedu iye yatinenge tichinamata kuna Mwari and things like that. Panozofa munhu kana misodzi chaiyo inoramba kubuda munozviziva imi vakomana imi. Chinhu chakaipa zvacho chaitika, but we are seeing dai vana Jonathan Moti ndivo vane capacity yekurida in between the lines. Munhu anoita zvake deliberate. Dai aida kubuda achitaura regarding the lessons that Zimbabwe is learning from such kind of fiasco. People aikwanisa kutipa some kind of perspective inonakidza. But since vari vanhu varikuda kuita zviri kuitika mazuva ano kubato redu tinorisapota, but vamwe taakutiza.
vanofanirwa kuva nedzidzo 1 yautaurwa naComrade Guto yekuti naro nationalism nekuti ukaona ganda remurungu ukaona zvakadai zoti hazvizi kana usiwe uri panyanga inyaya dzekuti tine maskeletons ari tikuwanisa mumakadhbhodhi edu akawanda inyaya dzekuti tiri kuba ndoka vachiona uchiita ukasha inyaya dzekuti vane upindindoga hutorapwa kunze kwenyika nhasi munomu ndiri kutaurira we are not prepared for Ebola but unowana vanhu vachitora mari vachinorapwa kunze kwenyika uko. So it's a sad story that we won't be able to have a clear nation from Zambia and develop my lessons here to much there. That is like going to plan a curve, which is what you to come a political leader. Mama, she's here, but I have a political will. You could have a exercise as a measure.
Aiwa tinotenda zvikuru mukoma Knox. Tinotenda. Of course, Mr. Knox has no kind words for some of the leaders that we have and their undemocratic tendencies. And he says Zimbabwe has a lot to learn from Zambia, of course.
Now we're getting a message that the late Mr. Michael Sata will be buried at the presidential burial site, that is the National Monument in Embassy Park in Lusaka. And I've got some messages placing on Facebook. One of the messages is from Michael Mpofu, who writes, let him rest in peace, but let those who are alive keep the ball rolling. Then we've got Mokwena Daniels, who writes, the vice president must guide the country to the next elections. After that, the elected president must ensure that the economy and lives of Zambians are improved. And then we've got a message from Belief Chuma, who asks a question, is that guy Scott a black man?
He's white.
He's white.
Scottish origin.
Yes. And then we've got Julian John Timire, who writes, may his soul rest in peace. And now we've got Tulani, who just sent a message right now. And he says, and now a white man is in charge. Does skin color matter at all? And that's a big question.
Indeed. We have a video,
right?
Yeah,
I guess we've got a video that was done by the VOA. And this video was done by Mr. Paul Ndino of VOA's TV to Africa, and he reports that he reports on Zambia's draft bill of the constitution. You know that they are crafting a new constitution right now.
It has been going on for years.
Yes. So now let's hear what he reports.
Zambia's ruling party, the Patriotic Front, says it's committed to giving Zambians a people-driven constitution, and it remains committed to giving the Zambians a constitution that will stand the test of time. Andrew Ntewewe, the president of the Young African Leaders Initiative, whose organization has been pushing for reforms, has played an important role in the draft constitution process. He says historically, any time Zambians want to come up with a constitution, it has to do with elections.
We are not looking for a constitution simply for the 2016 elections. We believe that elections are very important because they form the bedrock of democratic governance. But elections alone are not the entire constitution. So they're simply a component of the constitution.
Plans to overhaul the constitution were announced shortly after Michael Sata was elected president in 2011, as part of a series of steps in his top-to-bottom review of the country's policies. However, critics accuse the government of deliberately stalling the process in the interests of those in power. Others say the constitutional reform process has been slow to gather momentum because of a lack of consensus building from the various stakeholders.
I want to believe that as much as elections are very important, we can do this process without political expediency. We can do this process by seeking stakeholder involvement and consensus building.
In recent years, Zambia has enjoyed political stability and has an annual economic growth rate of 7%. The World Bank now classifies it as a lower middle income nation rather than a low income, meaning its gross national income per person has risen above $1,000. But Africa's second largest copper producer, home to 14.5 million people, is still struggling with poverty and high unemployment. Zila Milupi, a social entrepreneur and co-founder of a non-profit called Winners Circle, says young Zambians have a role to play in solving the unemployment problem.
If young people take the bull by the horns and start to believe actually in the potential that they have, if we start to be more open-minded, and if we start to foster creativity and risk-taking, if we make deliberate efforts to do those things and to really cultivate an entrepreneurship culture, I think that that really could be a significant growth sector for Zambia.
To get a sense of what Zambians think about their 50th independence anniversary, I spoke to a couple of residents on the streets of the capital, Lusaka.
The economy has changed. We have developed to a certain extent, but we have not reached where we are supposed to be.
We have enjoyed peace, we've enjoyed harmony, we've enjoyed a lot of good things.
President Michael Satta's death comes at a time when the Southern African nation is celebrating 50 years of independence. Meanwhile, Zambia's sometimes rocky relationship with China is now steadily growing. A drive through Lusaka and other cities shows a country on the move, with huge Chinese infrastructure projects spurring development.
Thank you there. That was done by VOA's Paul Ndiwo. A very good summary of the Zambia that Satta leaves behind. Maybe let's bring in Mr. Hamauswa and talk about this constitution. It has been going on for a long time. What's happening?
The constitution is one of the speakers, I think it was from the video, who was saying in Zambia you'd find that when the constitution issue is coming up, there is always a talk on the election. So there are some contentious issues in the constitution, like that one of centered on the issue of elections. So what has been happening in Zambia, unlike what happened in Zimbabwe, in Zimbabwe, though it was sometimes not really in practice, but there was a commitment to have the constitution process being led by the people. The people had an input. Though the parliament is there, but you would find that the parliament now is responsible to the people. But one of the daily papers in Zambia actually said it is the parliament that is going to decide, especially on the roadmap. So everything is centered on the parliament. Yes, the parliament is a lawmaking board, but there is need for the input from the people. That is one thing that I would say Zambia needs to go a step further in their democracy. You would find that they are very, very effective in terms of changing the government, but in terms of involvement in public policy making, in day-to-day political process, that is still there is a lot that needs to be done. There is need for the civil society. There is also need for the government to realize that whatever they do, they are accountable to the people, and the people, they should also move towards and critically engage in the government, so that the people, they have an input that is really considerable in terms of the constitution-making process.
Thank you so much. And of course, for those of you who are just joining us tonight on Studio 7, we are talking about the death of Zambian President Michael Satta. Satta was born in 1937. He was a veteran trade unionist, and he contested in the presidential elections twice, and he could not succeed. And that's why some commentators are calling his death a Shakespearean tragedy, in that only after 2.5 years in power, he has died. Gibbs.
Ye baba Sifile isibuye khona ngapho ke eZambia nxa usukhangele ke isisekelo sombuso lesesibunjwayo kambe siqhatheke kanganani nxa usukhangela ke ilizwe leZambia?
Isisekelo sombuso lesisiqhatheke kakhulu ngoba yiso esizalungisisa indaba ezibongohlupho olukhona khathesi lokuthi abanye ezinye izizalwane zeZambia azenelisi ukuthi zingene lazo esikhundleni sokuba ngumongameli. so bekukhangelelwe ukuthi nxa isisekelo sombuso leso sitsha singalungisiswa siza khangela indaba zenezo zokuthi kuyini okufunekayo ukuthi umuntu angene ukuba ngumongameli, khangele nje lokuthi ukhetho lukamongameli luqhutshwa kanjani, ngoba kathi bayenza leyo bathi first past the post system. Kodwa ke le isekelo sikhona kathesi ngesokuthi kuba kuzavele okhankasela ukuba ngumongameli ahle angene evele sazakala ukuthi ozabe ngumsekelo wakhe ngubani, njalo kumele abele athola amavoti adlula ama-50 adlula izigaba ezingama-50 ekhuleni.
So singatsho ukuthi phela sokufana ngazani sokusezimbabwe phela abazama ukwenza khona?
Hayi kuyahambelana, kodwa hayi kuchiyene kancane, ngoba lapho kathesi ungakhangela ukuthi isisekelo sombuso lesesikhona vasitshintsha ngo-96 lapho ukhawundo kwakungani kwasokulefungafunga lokuthi ukhawundo wayesefuna ukuphenduka esikhundleni, so Chiluba sesithi umdala lokuthi angadina angaphenduka esikhundleni, kahle sitshintshe isisekelo sombuso ukuthi wonke umuntu olabazali bakhe abangazalwa eZambia kayenelisi ukuthi abe ngumongameli. So sebebona ukuthi sokuphazamisa, ngoba ukhathi umuntu onjengoScott umuntu wazalelwa lapho wakhulela lapha impilo yakhe yonke phila efunda lokusebenza lapha, kodwa bathi kayenelisi ukuthi abe ngumongameli ngenxa yokuthi abazali bakhe abazalelwanga lapha.
Uyabeka kuhle ke indaba yethu Mnumzana Sifile ungayikatshana. What he's saying is that this constitution that has been crafted may actually tackle some of these problems, including this problem that Mr. Scott is actually facing. He says it was crafted during the time when Mr. Chiluba had a problem with Mr. Kaunda, So at the end of the day, anyone whose parents are, resident outside the country cannot be, a president. So he says this may actually solve it. And then at the same time, I think he mentioned a crucial point that according to the contents of the current draft, if somebody gets 51% of the vote, he becomes the president.
First past the post. Mr. Hamauswa, back to you. Of course, in that video, Paul talked about the relationship between the Chinese and Zambia. And China is Zimbabwe's very, very close ally. Just tell us a bit about the on-again, off-again, on-again relationship between SATA and the Chinese.
Yeah, I think what really happened during the election campaign, SATA really wanted to move a step whereby they will make sure that the Zambian people will really benefit from their natural resources such as copper. And for him, he felt that the Chinese investors, they are not really benefiting the African people. So he was really bold enough to say, in line with his campaign catchphrase, that more money into your pocket, and then saying that you are going to chase the Chinese. So, but now, after winning the elections, and reality now came that it was not really viable to chase away the Chinese. But still, I think he was supposed maybe to do something closer to what he had promised, to engage the Chinese, so that at least not only the Chinese, but all the foreign investors, and try to come up with a solution. Like what Manawasa did. When he came to power, he sat down with the chief executives of the foreign mining companies, and they came up to an agreement of 15% of what they called windfall tax. And that windfall tax, some Zambians said, this is the one that was used to kickstart infrastructural developments that SATA and the government were actually continuing with. So you realize that the issue between China and Africa is really about is China benefiting from Africa? Yes, we say Zimbabwe is cause China they are all-weather friend. There is nothing like that in international relations. There are no permanent friends, but permanent interests. You'd find that the Chinese premier has never been to Zimbabwe, but he has been to other countries in Africa, not to Zimbabwe. And then you would also realize that how much Zimbabwe is really getting from China. You find if you compare Zimbabwe and Zambia, maybe Zambia is really benefiting. We have Haiga here, which is coming from China. We have a lot of sub-depots of these companies from China and India, they Tata. But in Zimbabwe, sometimes there is nothing. You see, so then you really question the interest of the Chinese. They put their money where they feel their money will be secure. Now in Zambia, because there is democracy, and the Chinese, they really feel that their money is secure. And corruption is not that much as compared to Zimbabwe. They cannot really invest in Zimbabwe. But Zimbabwe could have good conditions for investment, safe for the political environment and corruption. Then that would be a problem again. So in short, their relationship is centered on the interest. If the interest of all the parties are being actually met, then we are likely to have a cordial relationship.
Thank you, Mr. Hamauswa. Of course, like he's saying, China does not need comrades anymore. It needs a business.
Certainly. Now, let's get a bit of information that we are receiving right now. So it appears as if in a brief televised address today, Mr. Guy Scott confirmed his appointment as acting vice president. Now, here's what he said, quote, "The period of national mourning will start today. We'll miss our beloved president and dear comrade." So now, going into other details, Mr. Sata was a devout Catholic. You know that? And then he was a police officer, a railway man, and a trade unionist. So now he worked in London as a railway porter and went back to Zambia, and became a member, or let me say, an employee of a taxidermist company. So he has been all over the show.
Indeed.
So when he left the country, right, Blessing, then Defense Minister Edgar Lungu was actually named as acting president. So which means maybe there were some issues, to do with the vice president. So that's why some Zambians were saying that Mr. Guy Scott is a ceremonial vice president. So coming back to you, Mr. Sifile, looking at the way things are happening in Zambia, what could be the role of Zimbabwe in all this? Do you see any, anything that the ruling ZANU-PF party will try to do in Zambia to make sure that they've got a friendly neighbor that comes after elections?
Well, it's difficult to tell at the moment, but what I know is that the late Mr. Sata used to get a lot of inspiration from Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe. I think that's what inspired even the name of his party. He called it the Patriotic Front, and if you look at his symbol, it's also a clenched fist. So he used to get a lot of inspiration from President Robert Mugabe, and he's not made that a secret. And then also I think the acting president, Vice President Dr. Scott, he also has a relationship with ZANU-PF. I understand that. I don't know whether it was in the 50s or when he actually was involved in the fight for Zimbabwe's liberation. So there is that background, which I think probably would be used as some kind of springboard to revitalize the relationship between the two parties, that is ZANU-PF and the Patriotic Front.
Mr. Hamauswa, to just conclude quickly, relations between Zambia and Zimbabwe?
Yeah, I think the relationships between Zambia and Zimbabwe are not going to be really affected, but negatively, but strengthened. Because we have seen that when Sata came in, the relationship normalized. They only went wrong when Mwanawasa was in power, where he referred to Mugabe after the 2008 elections, that Mugabe has now become an embarrassment to the region.
Thank you so much.
The relationships will be okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hamauswa. I want to thank our guests this evening, Mr. Shakespeare Hamauswa from Molongosho University in Zambia, Mr. Vusumuzi Sifile Sibanda, a Zimbabwean based in Zambia, and also Professor Shadreck Guto, based in South Africa. He is a lawyer by profession. And we want to thank our listeners, viewers, and all those who sent us text messages. Signing off, this is yours truly, Blessing Zulu.
And I'm Kip Skube. Good night, Zimbabwe.